Hello and welcome to the next lesson. Now we'll talk about render elements in both render engines, Corona and V-Ray. I share with the ones that we use during our production process. So as you can see, I have two files opened. On the right hand side we have the Corona scene and on the left hand side we have a V-Ray scene. I start with Corona renderer. Every time you create visualization, I advise you to add a C-masking wire color pass to make selection in post-production easy. In V-Ray, the name is pretty similar. It's called V-Ray wire color. Let me show you how these passes look in case you don't know them. They are pretty similar, aren't they? In V-Ray, it's nice to use V-Ray Material ID and V-Ray Object ID if you want to have selection only for objects or elements with specific materials or just for the particular objects. I select the object and I change the object ID in the object properties. And I change the material ID of one of the materials. Click on the material and choose one, for instance, from the list. Okay, if we move down, you can see that there is no place to set ID as V-Ray takes it automatically. Let's start interactive rendering. So we can see that on the V-Ray Material ID, we can see only the object that has this gold material, while on the V-Ray Object ID pass, we can see the face sculpture we selected to have ID 1. In Corona, we can use the C-masking mask element. And here, we can choose from different modes. The most often I use RGB mode. And here, we can change if we want to have material or object, or additionally, we can just manually select what should be included on this mask pass. And I set the same things as before. So I change the object ID of this face sculpture and material ID of the gold material. So you can notice that in Corona, we need to set these IDs manually. Here we go. The result is exactly as I wish. So we have an object with gold material in red and an object with ID 1 in green on the mask. I often use reflection and refraction elements in post as this can help with creating a final touch a lot. So better to have these passes than not. In V-Ray, it's called V-Ray reflection and V-Ray refraction. Let's see how these render elements look. They don't look the same way as these scenes are not identical, but the characteristics of materials are captured adequately. Okay, let's go to the next one. Maybe Z-depth. In V-Ray, it's also named similarly V-Ray Z-depth. So you can see that these render engines are pretty similar. Okay. So here we can set minimum and maximum values. I change the maximum value to 2000 millimeters. And here I do the same, but we have the scene in centimeters. So I type 200 centimeters. Okay, and let's render. Great, the effect is the same. Awesome. Let me show you one thing. You can notice that we have fog added here, so we can use a special render element in case we want to highlight this effect later. By the way, we'll learn how to create fog in both render engines later on in the course. In V-Ray, choose V-Ray Atmosphere, and let's render. Here we go. You can see that the fog is not as visible in the V-Ray version. It's because the lighting is different. But it's not a problem. We can simply increase the multiplier value. By the way, if we change the color of the light, it will also be visible on the fog layer. Let me show you. Anyway, let me show you another helpful render element you can use. I prepared a leaf with the proper materials on this. So as you probably know, materials like leaves have an effect called translucency. And sometimes we may want to highlight this effect in post-production. To do this, in Corona we can use the render element. Let me show you. Here we go. Now let's add the light so we can see how it's changing. We can also change the color or intensity, and it will affect this element. In V-Ray, we don't have a dedicated path to translucency, but we can make use of V-Ray lighting. Let me create a light here as well. And let's start to render. You can see that if we increase the value strong enough, we'll get the effect visible. But in this case, we'll need the mask for the material that included this effect. So we can, for instance, use Material ID or Object ID for this. So in this case, in the post, we'll use V-Ray lighting and we'll mask it with V-Ray Object ID. Okay, so these are the render elements we'll be using during the course, and the ones that I typically use. I add the link to my YouTube video about render elements below this video, so you can watch it as well. See you in the next lesson.